Okay, so now I want to open up Premiere Pro. We've got to start a new project. Okay, so for here we want to be able to save our files into the render drive so they're all in the same place. So if you click the browse button, and we can now go to the Elva drive. And rendering, and select your folder in post-production, final composites, or actually in the render passes, scene 1, AVI, we can save the scene 1 file. Select this folder, call it scene 1, and okay, this should boot up our sequence presets. So for this one, the specific file we need is the Adv.Comp HD422. We need the 1080i and the top 25 frames per second, and hit OK. That should be your default for all of the programs. Okay, so I'm just going to fit this into the render window so we can see how all this fits. Okay, this is now our full editing suite, so I'll go through the interface. It's understanding if Premiere Pro, to sort of see it a bit like Photoshop but for film. So what you've got is a whole series of effects and things that you can overlay on the image and you can control over the timeline. The first part of the interface is what's called the bin, where you store all the files. If you right click over the bin, you can import the files, which I'll do to start with, and I'll use the sequence that I've already created in scene 2. So you can see by clicking on the first file, which is the scene 2 rendered frames out, and you click the numbered stills and hit open, it will import for you the entire animation, which you can stick in the frame here, and you can see this is the animated file. Okay, so you can see what's happened now. We've got in the bin, we've got the PNG files. This is the source file. So if I select this and double click on it, it will come up in the source sequence. Here are the effects controls that we can do on that particular file, and over here is the actual timeline window. So anything that happens in this timeline will be here. You can play the file. This will play quite clunky because it's running over the network, and it's quite high resolution. But you can see that you can use this to toggle backwards and forwards. We also have a jockey wheel, which allows you to go backwards and forwards quite slowly. So fast, you'll see that our tool palette, which is down here in the bottom corner, the main aspects we use with the tool palette is the razor tool, which once again in traditional film editing, the film editors would take the film and literally use a razor blade to cut the film at certain parts to be able to edit, and this allows you to break a sequence into 2 parts. Mind you, I would tend to suggest that with the way that we're project managing the semester, that there should be limited cutting and pasting of particular files, because the storyboard will tell us exactly what we need. But you can see how you can move files around. If you put the cursor or the mouse over the end of the frame, we can also push and pull that backwards and forwards, or we can delete that and I can stretch out the entire frame again. So you can see that it's just pushing and pulling. Now we have the animation files preset to these as individual files. The best format to have to do the editing, so after we've done the rendering in 3D Studio Max, we've got all the single frames, we import them into Premiere Pro. We then want to export out. Okay, so by the way, this is our sequence. We can have as many sequences as we want. So you can create new sequences here, and that will be where we'll do most of our editing. But at the moment, I want to output this sequence, file, export, as, and now this becomes really important too, is to match the sequence settings, and that will give us the best output. And now all we have to do is hit export, or we could send a FAQ. So if we have a few files to export, we can queue them all and get the computer to sort it out while you go off and have a coffee. But for this first time, I'll just hit the export button, which will get the individual frames into an individual MPEG file. Okay, so we've exported that file. Now what we can do is open a new project, and this is going to be our main file where we'll keep all of the animation of the 60 seconds together. So once again, go into your folder, post-production, final composite, and we'll call this 60 seconds. Sorry, file new project. We've got to go through and make sure we've got once again the file in the right place. So we'll go back into render passes, and I'll do our 60-second file here. Once again, make sure you've got the Adv.Comp HD selected. This brings up a new window, and then what we can do is import here, rather than all the single frames, the AVI files, which I've already saved previously. So you'll see in AVI I have scene 1, and in scene 2 okay, so once again you'll be doing all of your files. I've just got 2 scenes, but I wanted to show you how now we can start to manage it. You'll see down in the bottom left hand corner of your sequence bar is a slider, and that is literally a scale slider of the time it takes. So if we now see the animation, we've got 2 of the MPEG files correlating. Now this is where we have our in and out time specified, so you can see that we can work out our timing of the transition we're trying to do. And we have our frame count at the top here, so we can manipulate for how long that transition is going to happen. Now whenever we have an overlay, it's just like layers in Photoshop. The top layer will always sit over the top of the layer underneath it, so with these video layers. Okay, so here what I want to do is show you how to do a really basic transition, which will be a crossfade. First thing we have to do is select the piece of video that we want to do the edit to. So you click in the sequence timeline the video clip that you want to manipulate. Now that we've done that, we can hit keyframes in opacity. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the opacity of that frame from 100%, which means full, to 0, which will be completely transparent. In order to achieve that, we just need to hit a keyframe at the beginning and at the end of that clip. Hit another last keyframe, so this is a type of animation in a sense, we'll then make that go down to 0. If we now see how that transition works, we can see how it bleeds from one to the other. Now, once again, the other little trick that I've made is that in the initial scene, I have left off, and this is called continuity, I've left off a view of the building, which then bleeds into the same view close up, which then does a pan across that facade. So it's always a nice thing to try and keep the movement in the same direction and to kind of use the end of each of the clips to trigger the in point of a new clip. Okay, once again, as you work, then we'll be able to output this frame. So I'll output this as an MPEG, and then we can view that in any of our browser quite smoothly. So I'll export that to media. Once again, match the settings and Q this time, so you'll see how this works. This will open a new program called the Media Encoder. And we'll start the queue. You can see it's already waiting, so you can rack up a whole series of these if you want.